reaction episode to Boris Sofman's interview on the Lex Fridman podcast. Boris Sofman is founder of Anki and now works for Waymo. I want to talk about uh, criticism, and I had an episode yesterday about good and bad criticism. So I want to criticize this particular episode and use Boris as an example of how a good person with good intentions and definitely skills can still be a bad investment. Anki is a good example, but I also want to talk about what Thomas Mann would call intellectual dandies, and I think that is a little bit of a criticism I have to Lex Fridman. Shout out to Lex Fridman; he's incredibly inspiring. I listen to almost all of his episodes, but I don't agree with him. And one of the things that I want to push back is that he's a bit of an intellectual dandy. Like he lives in this bubble of some sort of software engineering, robotics, video game type world that is a foregone conclusion, and anybody who is in that world is brilliant. And if it, let's say in the case of Anki, if they fail, then it's just bad luck, and it's somehow somebody else's fault, but they're brilliant. And of course, when they do something well, it's their brilliance. When things go wrong, then it's just bad luck. So there's a little bit of this, what Thomas Mann again would call intellectual dandyism. And I know, Lex, if you hear this, you're a black belt. I don't want to have any issues with you. I'm a big admirer, and I'm sure you're an open person, so you can take a bit of criticism. So this is the kind of criticism that I call good criticism. It's not vulgar criticism, like I said in my episode yesterday. There's criticism that I consider vulgar, that is sort of hostile to thought, intellectual argument. It's more politically driven. To me, this is not, because we at Orange Capital Partners have a large investment in Tesla, so we're incredibly interested in any kind of approach towards robotics. And this is a good example of Boris Sofman is a good example of somebody who I feel like has done it wrong and is still doing it wrong. And this is what I'm going to discuss in this episode. This is Not Even Wrong podcast. It's November 17th, 2021. This is Krim Dolko. For the day, we're up 3.5%. The market's down 30 basis points. For the year, we are up 44.5%. The market is up 22.6%. We're outperforming by 21.9%. So first, let's give a little bit of a background of what's going on here, and then let's go into the flesh of this episode, which is I want to use this criticism that I have towards this particular discussion between Boris Sofman and Lex Fridman to illustrate what I mean with good criticism. So Boris Sofman created Anki, a company that had certain, I would say, innovative ideas about robotics and games and things like that. Anybody who doesn't know, please go check out what they are. I don't want to spend too much time explaining. The point is this: Anki was a good idea in my view, but it just didn't work. Even I bought a toy that they sold for my son. It was just a mess. It didn't work. It was at best one of those things that you just have to invest a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of passion and enthusiasm to somehow see the value of this product. And I have a feeling that it was one of those products that sold really well in Silicon Valley, particularly with people's kids that have invested or have some sort of tangential investment in a company like that. But everybody else was kind of like, what is this? What is this? And the point is that very often you have people like Boris Sofman coming from Carnegie Mellon, which was a so-called bastion of robotics. And this is the exact problem that I want to discuss here. So these people at Carnegie Mellon, they were deeply involved in the DARPA challenge. And in my view, they were too early, and they wasted a lot of intellectual firepower on technologies that just weren't relevant. And they still, of course, got funding, and they had the reputation and all that stuff. And they were able to go on with this company Anki, and they did exactly what almost anybody else coming out of Carnegie Mellon has been doing, and I guess still is doing, which is they created things that maybe look good in a paper, in an academic paper, that are definitely impressive if you go and talk to other VCs or even academics, but they're not good products, they're not good services. And in this particular episode, Lex Fridman kind of points out that, oh, it's so bad that you guys didn't succeed. Oh, it's such bad luck. And it kind of makes it sound like, gosh, how stupid are we people not to understand how brilliant this product is, and why didn't it work? So instead, I think what should have been said, and I think this is very important when it comes to our fund, we want humility. Boris should just have said, look, I was wrong. I just was wrong, and here's why. Instead of talking, and again, I have a lot of respect for Boris. It's not, he sounds like an incredibly nice person, but he just doesn't have that kind of humility to say, here's why I was wrong. He talks about things like it was seasonal, that it was difficult to forecast cash flow, I don't know, stuff like that. I mean, come on. This is like your child comes home from school and starts talking to you about the lunch and the lunch break when in fact they got bad grades and you want to know why they got bad grades. I just feel like this type of humility is incredibly important. It's lacking in this particular interview, and it's coming from both sides. And I think Boris could, in my view, is probably not even the problem here. The problem is Lex Fridman. He's an intellectual dandy, and maybe he's very proud of that. He just has this belief that engineers, particularly people in the software virtual gaming space, are somehow superior to other people, and that the market just doesn't get it. And there's a phrase in this episode which is saying everything. It kind of says, "Oh, this was a brilliant product, but the problem was it was a business, and the business it just didn't work." Like as if brilliance and product is somehow dislocated from business, and that's the key. So this is the criticism we want to exhibit here, which is, it is absolute. Every company is defined by its cost structure and by its competitive response and the response of its competitors to whatever the company is doing. Every company. There's no such thing as brilliant products and services and then somehow the market doesn't get it or any of that stuff. It's completely useless when it comes to fund management. Maybe if you want to go on a Lex Fridman podcast and have a nice 3-hour conversation and tap yourself on the shoulder, you can do that and get jobs at places like Waymo. But as far as investing and making money is concerned, this is what matters to us at Orange Capital Partners. This doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Because the cost structure of Anki was not the right one. The product was either way too expensive for what it did, or it was both. It was not even doing anything and still way too expensive. And the competitive response was that they couldn't compete with whatever else people were doing, in particular video games. And that's a very serious problem. You're up against virtual video games, and you're somehow trying to force people into accepting that physical games are as good as video games, and that somehow people should not be spending time on video games, but also on this whatever Anki was. Well, you were wrong. Your competitive response was wrong. The competitive response of whoever you were trying to dislocate was much stronger because their cost structure relative to their product and services was much better. So this is the key. And now going forward, I'm actually only about half into the podcast. They're going to talk about Tesla. Boris now works for Waymo, and he's head of the trucking division. And what he's doing there, I guess, I haven't finished the podcast, so I apologize, and I probably have to do a follow-up. I just want to get this episode out because I can make my point here without the podcast. I just feel that what's happening with Waymo is very similar to Anki. We have a technology which is being sort of pushed down the throat of society with the idea that eventually we will get it. Or if we don't get it, we will be just forced to use it. Then, to be fair, if you're Google, you kind of have a precedent because nobody actually believed that Google is anything useful or important, and it ended up being incredibly important and useful. So they have a precedent, and they can say, look, we've done this before, we will just push down this technology until it works. Now, the question, again, from our perspective, Orange Capital Partners, what we look at is simply, okay, what is the cost structure, what's the competitive response? Cost structure of Waymo is incredibly, incredibly high, and the cost structure is not just for the actual cost of goods sold that are necessary to provide the product, as hopefully the listeners by now know. What we look at Orange Capital Partners, even more than just the cost of goods sold, is the cost of iteration. How much iteration can you do? How fast and how expensive is it? Because we believe that the only way to solve problems is by continuously error correct. And for that, you need to have a system in place that gives you an ability to iterate very fast. And at Waymo, we believe that is unfortunately incredibly expensive to iterate because you got to go to a place like Phoenix. You got to geo-fence an area. You got to make sure everybody behaves in a certain way. Even the streets have to be, and the roads and everything has to be a certain way, and all that stuff. And then you can kind of implement the technology, and then you go from there. How is this scalable? I don't know, but they might have again, they might not tell us everything, and I want to keep an open mind. I'm just saying, and again, this podcast, this particular episode is about criticism, good criticism. We're just criticizing this approach. We could be wrong, but our criticism is that the cost of iteration of Waymo is very high. The people like Boris Sofman don't have enough humility to admit that they were wrong, and that probably that lack of humility is transpiring also at Waymo. And the reason he went to Waymo and is working there and is very happy working there is because the culture of Waymo is such that nobody ever makes mistakes there. It's only the market not getting it and stuff like that. When in fact, the way it works in real life is that you create something and then you test it against the observer, which is either nature or people or the market or whatever you want to call it. Somebody is going to observe and test. This is general relativity applied to business. Who is the observer in the case of Waymo? Well, it's not clear. Maybe in business school terms, you could just ask who is the customer, but that's also very dangerous because, again, it's complicated because who is actually using Waymo and who is paying for Waymo is not clear. So all these things are not clear. They're not clear in the podcast, and because of the lack of clarity of who is the customer, who is paying, who is the observer, who decides if Waymo is a success or not, all these things are not clear. Now let's use another example, Tesla. Who is the customer? It's me, it's you, it's Frau Heinrich and Mr. Johnson. Joe Public is the customer, paying for the product, using the product. So the observer, the payer, the customer, it's all one person. I think if I take any kind of employee at Tesla out of completely random, out of the factory, out of the C-suite, out of the engineering team, and just ask them this question, who is the customer, who pays, and who is the observer, they would answer within seconds. If I do the same with Waymo, I would get probably, if I have 50 people, I would get 50 different answers. So this is one big red flag that we raise at Orange Capital Partners that gives us also comfort that Tesla is way ahead of all these companies. The same applies to Cruise and other so-called competitors. Again, everything we do at Orange Capital Partners is always within the context of the competitive response. The theory of competitive response is really the theory of disruption, and the theory of disruption is the theory of this. The purpose of the theory of disruption is to actually help us generate wealth, because the purpose of our hedge fund is to generate wealth by investing in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices with large impact, which, in other words, is disruption. So we have a theory. The theory of disruption is that we need to have low cost of iteration, that we need to have a competitive response, which is such that you can lower the cost of iteration relative to whoever you're trying to displace in the market, because that is going to help you error correct faster. Any kind of system in the world, even if you go all the way up to politics, any system which has faster error correction at lower cost will win. That's why capitalism wins over communism. That's why totalitarian regimes can't compete with free type of regimes. All of these things can be boiled down to the faster you can error correct, lower cost. Well, cost being things like violence, things like people hanging on to their jobs, and all these things. We're just using cost as a placeholder for a lot of things. It's not just cost in terms of like how much does it cost me to buy this material or things like that. For example, the cost at Waymo to iterate is very high because you have to stick with a certain framework of science and scientific approach, and people at Carnegie Mellon do it in a certain way, and if you come with new ideas, you'll be laughed at, you'll be kicked out, you'll be the laughing stock. Trust me, I've been there myself on Wall Street, or when I worked for Neue Zürcher Zeitung. I've always tried to do things differently, and I bounced my head against the establishment, and those weren't even very well established engineers such as Carnegie Mellon people. So I can only imagine how difficult it must be at a place like Waymo to break new ground, do new things, change the way things are done and all that stuff. Having said that, of course, the question then comes, well, how is it a Tesla? Maybe Tesla is the same. Who says that Tesla is an easy place to do things differently and all that? And of course, this is one of the big questions we have, which, to be honest, we haven't really been able to answer. Unfortunately, we wanted to go to the AI day, we wanted to go to battery day, we wanted to go to the shareholder day, and we couldn't. All of these things were either virtual or we weren't invited. The big question we have to Tesla, with Elon Musk or Martin Yecha, the IR, or Zach Kirk on the the CFO, whoever wants to answer this question, is how easy is it at Tesla to change the way things are done? How expensive is it to iterate? And iteration can be done on many levels, and there's also some sort of meta iteration. So you can have an iteration of the existing processes, but then you can also iterate the actual process that you have in place. So there's a lot of levels of iteration, and the question, of course, is how easy is it at Tesla? And there's also sort of a cost of, this is an optimization problem if you want, because even if you wanted to have the most iterative company in the world, you would still want to have certain structures in place, because you can't constantly change everything. You need to have a certain direction. For example, Tesla is betting on cameras. So what you need to have is iterate on the cameras, make them better, and then make the software better to use cameras to see the world, to change the software, maybe change the architecture, rewrite the architecture, then use something like Project Dojo to train at faster levels. So there's a lot of things you can do in terms of iteration on many different levels. Our feeling is that at least, and again, this is all about competition, competitive response, relative to whoever Tesla is displacing, which is basically the Tesla is displacing 3 players in the market. One is the existing auto players. Second is the people like Waymo and those types. And then third is, I'm calling the unknown. Okay, let's talk about the first one. The first one, existing auto players. So take somebody like Daimler, BMW. How are their cost of iteration relative to Tesla? I think it's pretty easy to say that they are much, much higher. BMW yesterday just announced a cooperation with Qualcomm to do something along the lines of ADAS, and I don't want to go into details, please check the press releases, but it's clear that imagine if BMW wants to change something, how difficult that process must be. Talk to Qualcomm, then change their practices, and they have their own investments, and it's a nightmare. That's the problem of horizontal integration. And so therefore, we believe that this first level, clearly Tesla is going to displace them with their much better cost structure. Second, the people at Waymo, we believe that, again, here Tesla has a much, much lower cost of iteration, because first and foremost, they're not coming from a high pedestal. A lot of things is, I would say this is a lot of human ego, vanity, all that stuff plays a role, because the engineers are the same. I mean, you hire people from Carnegie Mellon, you hire people from MIT, the same does Waymo. But there is a lot less of a pedestal effect. I call it the pedestal effect, which is, and I've worked with people that we hired when I was on Wall Street. They came from Stanford and MIT and places like that. They were much more difficult to work with. Some of them were brilliant, really, in Lex Fridman's words. They were able to come up with ideas that I didn't have, and they were smarter than me. But in the end, it was difficult to work with them and very difficult to generate wealth, which is part of the reason why I left Wall Street, because I just couldn't work with these people. They weren't effective in generating wealth. They were effective in transmitting sort of alluding to others that they're smart and things like that, which maybe works for them, doesn't work for me. So I think there's a problem that I see with Waymo along those lines. Cruise, I'm not sure what's going on there, but I would say Cruise has 2 problems. It's a hybrid between the old system, they're part of GM, so they have to deal with all the old stuff and then the new stuff, which is, again, the pedal stall effect. Maybe it's not as bad. And then we have other companies, Com.ai, and I would say Com.ai is definitely a very interesting company. Andreas Hotz is a really interesting guy and all that. I believe his name is Andreas Hotz. If not, I apologize. Anyway, the person who created Com.ai, very interesting guy. He's actually the guy who gave me the idea that a lot of the old guard, particularly Carnegie Mellon guard, is sort of stuck in this DARPA challenge idea that you need a sensor fusion and all that, lasers and all these things, when in fact, after 2012, all you needed is vision, because 2012 was the breakthrough with Jeffrey Hinton's paper about computer vision and machine learning, and that was the kickoff. So that's why the DARPA challenge was, in a sense, very bad, because it was too early, and it sucked a whole generation of engineers into a fallacy of being able to do something with a lot higher cost and a lot less iteration, when in fact all you had to wait is till 2012. And then the ImageNet paper came out, and from there on you had a much lower cost structure, and Tesla is jumping on that bandwagon. So the first two, to summarize, the first two players that Tesla is displacing, I don't think they have a good competitive response to Tesla when it comes to full self-driving. Now the third one is the unknown, and this is the one where I'm saying, well, there's the startup somewhere in the garage, some Steve Jobs or Elon Musk of the future, that is working on something, and of course that is a hypothetical. Is Tesla better than them? We don't know, because we don't know who they are. So what do you do if you're Elon Musk? How do you even deal with a threat like that? Well, I think one is you relentlessly drive down costs. I think the $25,000 car is one of the reasons why Tesla is just relentlessly driving down costs. Project Dojo is one of those. You just have to, even though you don't have a threat, Waymo, BMW, Daimler, Volkswagen, nobody's a threat. GM, nobody's a threat. Fine, but you still have to kind of pretend like that somebody is just behind, just around the corner. This is kind of the way I see it, and I feel like Tesla has that humility. They have that humility, at least in my interaction with people, either personally or through podcasts and all these video things that they do. There is a humility there. You need humility. It's in the end, these are humans that are building stuff. And what you need is humility, and you need the kind of humility, not the kind of humility a la Lex Fridman saying, oh, I'm brilliant, but I make mistakes. No, the kind of humility was, I'm not brilliant. I'm actually stupid. You know what? I'm not very good. I don't work for MIT. I don't work for anybody. I don't do advertising. I wait tables. I'm not worthy all this attention. I know this is a big one. And, you might ask me, oh, hey, you guys at Orange Capital Partners, what are you doing? You're sitting on a pedestal. You have some of the best returns in the world. You're kind of piggybacking on those laurels. Yes, we're not that human. It's very difficult to be. There's a certain optimum of humility, and you can't maximize humility either. I'm just saying the humility that I see at Tesla is much better than the one in other places, and it's absolutely necessary. What do I mean with humility? What is? I once had a podcast maybe a year ago or so, which was inspired by, his name eludes me now, the jiu-jitsu guy from Pleasanton, guerrilla jiu-jitsu. Whoever founded that, I forgot his name. Doesn't matter. I think he trained or still trains Khabib and that team. So he's one of the top jiu-jitsu guys in the Bay Area, and he said, winning mindset is the weapon. Mindset is the weapon. Now he actually said mindset as a weapon, and then I changed. I said mindset is the weapon. Your mindset is actually your weapon, particularly when it comes to the knowledge business. That's why we have an innovation stack. That's why the foundation of our innovation stack is David Deutsch, the beginning of infinity. It's not because he's a good writer or we like him or whatever. I don't care. It's the mindset. The mindset that he is propagating with this book, in our view, is fundamental to January 12th. You need to have that kind of mindset. You can improve, I'm sure. We can iterate around our innovation stack. All these things can happen. But right now, we're very happy with them. The mindset. It is the mindset. The mindset is the weapon. And this is where Tesla is stronger than Waymo. And this is where Tesla is stronger than the established car industry. And everything in wealth generation comes down to competitive response. The cost structure, the cost of iteration, and the competitive response to that. And Tesla is winning on all those fronts.